but then when you go back into the history and you see Pope, I think it was Pope Paul VII, who actually made an encyclical that stated that we will now have all books state that the world is a globe after Copernicus.
Right.
And so, yeah,
We do know from history with Galileo and Copernicus and other individuals that the church once had a final say and a heavy sway on the dictates to determine whether, the planet rotated around the sun, or, it was earth centric, it was heliocentric at one point. At one point, I believe it was
geocentric.
geocentric.
Yeah.
So there's different perspectives, and they're always being dictated from what is considered to be the global authority on consciousness, if you will, which would be the Vatican, who sits as a vicegerent or a placeholder as the Godhead on this planet for divine intelligence, if you will. I mean, that's one hell of a lofty title to hold, but it's never explained even to their own congregants why there's an observatory at the Vatican, why their observatory is called Lucifer. you know, so for because people often say, "Oh, religion has nothing to do with astrology or astronomy or the observation of the stars," but that could be further from the truth. What do you think outside of the churches swaying the conversation? What else do you think it is about the populace that makes it so hard for them, to say, okay, I have to question any and everything that comes from this institution. Let's take a review of any and all things. And one of the most profound things that we could think of that they may be, you know, um, cutting the truth on is the location of where we exist in time and space. You know what I'm saying? Or as you say, the physical features of this plane of existence that we actually reside in. So what
Well,
what
I
what
mean,
mechanisms are at play? How far up does this thing go?
well, it started like I was saying at the with Pope Paul uh, the seventh, or Pope Pius VII himself wrote the encyclical and essentially uh, coerced as well as threatened the congregate with excommunication. That if they did not follow through with saying that the earth was a globe and erase 10,000 years of knowledge, that they would be excommunicated from the church. And excommunication was almost a death sentence for people who were really into the Catholic Church at that time.
Yes.
So, what happened was the Vatican at that time was the censor and the editor of all books having to do with history and science throughout the Western civilization. So, Western civilization's books were first edited through the Vatican before they were
Yes.
distributed into the education system. So, from that point forward, after
Through
they
Texas.
murdered after they murdered Copernicus and buried him in a unmarked grave because he didn't want to actually adhere to the heliocentric until after he died. But there was an insistence that he put it out there while he was alive to give it credibility. And then after it took on, they set one of his students, who he was teaching privately, poisoned him because he was one of the Jesuits, and the Jesuits used poison or the rope or the bullet. That's their creed. So from that point forward, the education system of the Western Hemisphere began to reflect that particular reality. And again, uh, everyone, the most periscopes and telescopes on Earth are owned by the Vatican. So the one Lucifer is one of the biggest ones, but most of the periscopes or the telescopes on Earth, especially in the Western Hemisphere, throughout Europe, and even throughout China and Africa, were actually set up by the Vatican. So they're the ones who essentially dictate what our uh, heliocentric so-called reality is supposed to be built on. So from this point forward, what I've intended to do, since people would be asking me, what's this about the flat Earth? Why am I wearing this? Why am I calling NASA lies? It's because the reality is that we are living in, like they say, the matrix. And essentially, we are in a cloud of illusion and delusion. And I'm going to break it down ace, deuce, trace, scientifically, epistemologically, everything that they have done to mask the truth about what you're seeing, and then reverse the polarity on your perception. Not only that, I'm going to teach you how to time travel. The secrets of time travel that was actually dealt with was not through machines. This was the original technology for time travel. You had to tap into what was called the Akashic Records at that point. The Akashic Records is based in water, what we call water, but it's a fluid. It's a fluid, as they have now said in some of the ancient books, that the dome is actually created from a fluidic material, which is essentially what we call compressed hydrogen here at our university. So from that point forward, what I'm going to do is break down the first thing I'm going to do in the first part, because it's going to break down into about 5 sections, because that's how much information was actually suppressed. So what we're going to do, we're going to give you all of the ways that your mind has been manipulated first. We're not even going to get into the so-called flatted plane. It's not a flat earth, it's a flatted plane. We're not going to get into that until somewhere midway of the webinar itself. The first part is going to show you how you've been bamboozled, what they're doing to your brain, and what they're doing to the informational system that's in place to keep you inside of that matrix.
Hmm, absolutely. Um, I have I have followed your work down many roads. Um, I'm thinking about the days of, 2000 and 2001. When I was coming to class, and I was the only one under the age of 40, and I heard your message, and your message was that this information was way too important, to not be, one, acted on, or to two, to die in a room of people that not gonna make use of it. And
Indeed.
we sprung into action, and 20 plus years later, we're here, on a planet that seems to have been, if not inundated, definitely introduced to some angle or aspect of the conversations that we were having, in small rooms, you know what I'm saying, throughout the Eastern Seaboard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and because of that, our ability to be patient with the information. There was many things that was introduced to me in 2000 I wasn't necessarily ready for, because I didn't have the life experience, right? I didn't necessarily have the backboard to bounce everything off of. But then you have the teachers, you have the master teachers, and we have a tendency to, you know, give our master teachers the benefit of the doubt, because we're like, I don't quite yet know, you know what I mean? But I'm gonna trust the big homie because I trust the big homie. And you have shown exceptional leadership in that respects, because everything that you share with us has come into full fruition. And like you said, these were once things that were considered to be quote unquote conspiracy, and now we can sit here and go through many of Valentine's prophecies, if you will, right? Things that you called a long time ago. Take today, for instance. Today is the beginning of Pride Month, and you at length kind of exposed this agenda at least 15 years ago, right? When it was unpopular, because you were being very specific and very graphic, very detailed, and you were jumping inside of people's living rooms, right? And shaking up family structures, because you were calling forth parents to be attentive to the things that were taking place. I saw a commercial the other day, and it was Beyonce on tour, and she was projecting a message on stage, and it was saying that it was talking about mind control, right? And it was saying that media, he who controls the media controls the mind, and we know where these ethos and these themes come from. But at the same time, as she is putting people under a state of mind control, she's telling them about mind control, and we And that's the Hegelian dialect right there. So we see the effectiveness of these techniques that, again, not too long ago you were pointing them out, and there wasn't that much, you know, real time data to weigh it against. But now it seems to be everywhere, and it's on the tongue of people, conversing about what they're conversing about. In the state of Florida that you are in, there seems to be a political uproar pushing back against this level of programming. Can you speak on that? Where this conversation has taken itself, the political climate around it, the fact that it's now a global conversation, and what are the ramifications moving forward as we as a people are attempting, to position ourselves for a continuity of our bloodline, of our species. Is the species on the ropes? Is there more of a sinister underlying agenda at play to knock us really out the box?
Yes, you hit it right on the head. There has been a plan in place for the last 100 years, first of all, to essentially destroy the United States from within. Back in the day, say in the late 80s, going into the 90s, especially during the 90s, when Oprah ascended the throne, so to speak, of feminism, um,
Hmm.
I was the countermeasure. I became the countermeasure to that, and was attacked a lot by our sisters and some men, not realizing that in my book, The Wounded Womb, I began to put down all of what I foresaw the empowerment of women. Not I don't call it empowerment. I call what's happening to women today is the weaponization of women. And
Yes.
when you give certain powers to a woman without any responsibility for the not the best parts of them, but the worst parts of them, what then there's an underlying current of control. There are puppet masters that are essentially using what would be the worst of what women really represent when given power. And that then began to undermine the authority, the primary authority of the man, which was essentially a tactical strategy that Sun Tzu spoke about when you wanted to destroy a more powerful enemy. When you want to destroy a more powerful enemy, you attack the men. But if the men are powerful, you can't take your army to them. You have to beat them before you even field your army. So, how do you do
Hmm.
that? Well, you weaponize the system that they presently are under by infiltrating that system. And what you do is essentially get into the places of political power, which they did, and begin to weaponize using women. Because remember, it was Rockefeller who funded the feminist movement. It was Rockefeller
Hmm.
himself who did it. He's the one who actually backed Ms. Magazine. And the proponents of that would be, what's her name, Steinem, Audre
Right.
Lorde, and the rest of them. And what they did was they gave the mistrust. They began to weaponize mistrust in women, and they needed someone to cross the color line in order for that particular message that white women had with their men. They had to make sure that they engendered that same conversation in black women against their men. So what happened
Right.
is during the time that I was, researching this and putting the book "The Wounded Womb" together, uh, it began to dawn on me that the weaponization of women to offset, which is essentially the secondary authority, to subsume the first or the primary authority, was part of the strategy and giving them political power so that emotions actually was what would then uh, predicate all decisions made. So what you looked at right then, if you saw me, because I was really castigated for this, I said that once you empower feminism, you're going to empower homosexuality. And right after that, when the women began to get powerful in Congress, they began to push legislation for homosexual powers or to bring it to the surface and weaponize that. So the two of them together began to weaponize all of what was the worst parts. Then the economy, because men were actually losing their jobs, since those who essentially ran the infrastructure of commerce began to ship their manufacturing overseas and then
Hmm.
took the middle class out of the equation, especially men.
Yes.
When they did that, the men began to now be powerless because they couldn't take care of their families. And then we began to see a lot of single parents, women who are having children without wedding. Everything was destroyed. Now you're seeing it happen today in Congress. You're watching our watching the schools be infiltrated by the very thing that I was telling everybody will happen. The schools, and they would go after your children. I even said they would go after your children. I said that 20 years ago. That's the next step. I said right after
Yep.
they give homosexual agenda a power base, you're going to watch the pedophiles. And sure enough, right after that, then
Yes, you
they began to
these
restructure psychology and the psychiatry and say that it's no longer pedophilia is a mental disease, it's a preference. So
let me
those who are
speak on your
controlling it,
behalf,
yeah,
um,
sexual
beloved,
preference.
please. Because when you were attempting to have these conversations with the community, once again, I was in the rooms that people walked out of because they said it was uncomfortable. They said it was too graphic. You were speaking about pedophilia before it was mainstream news. This was pre Epstein, before it was on the tongues and the lips of the general populace. You been was sounding the alarm. You been was talking about they're gonna attempt to change the classification in the mental clinics to normalize this behavior and put it as a subgenre underneath homosexuality. You been said that, you know what I'm saying? And people were very uncomfortable. But now look at where we're at,
Yeah.
right? Where it seems to be off the guardrails. Nobody can explain why they can't press up or put a stop to this legislation. Once again, it seems to be contradictory because people still believe that this is a Christian country. You feel me? And I asked a question, or a question was asked to me yesterday, and I made a comment, and it was like, well, the question that was never asked of us in the conscious community are what are our politics?
Hmm.
You know, does consciousness teeter more on the lines of conservatism, or does it teeter more on the lines of liberalism? Or is that where the branch breaks and you get woke versus consciousness? Because consciousness seems to teeter more on conservatism because we are still adherents to upholding, building black family structures in order to rebuild a
There you go.
nation.
There you go.
Those
We've
things
always
are,
been conservative. We've
yeah,
always been
yeah,
conservative.
that's
We were always
inexcusable. You
Republican.
can't throw that out.
Yeah, we were first Republicans before we turned into Democrats, and that was your boy. What's his name? President Johnson. After they killed
Johnson,
Kennedy,
right?
it was President Johnson who signed in the
Yeah, the
Civil
Great
Rights Act. And he
Society.
said, yeah,
Yeah,
and he said that as he wrote that, he said, "I'll have these NIGGAs voting Democrats for the
Democrat,
next
right,
200 years."
right. That's when the Dixiecrats slipped in, and he brought the
It was
Great
the
Society.
KKK. Yeah,
Was
the
their
KKK.
socialist program of that time, and that's where welfare. That's where Head Start comes from. That's where the WIC program comes from. That's where
That's when the
Medicaid
abortion
comes from.
clinics came up. The
That's where
abortion
that's
clinics
where the
came up in
abortion
the same
clinics
way.
came, right.
Family planning.
So yeah, and then all of this coming out of the 1964 report from Patrick Moynihan called the Negro Family, the PDF, that was profound and precedent in terms of them saying this is when the Democrats wiped their hands. And they
Hmm.
said, look, these people are incapable of upward mobility. They said they don't even control the dope. They don't even control their own underworld. And they said that they are going to be a societal detriment being raised by mothers. They said any society that is raised by mothers alone, we have to write that society off because inherently that society will not advance forward. So they closed the books on us at the same time that they was bringing in the so-called Great Society, and
Well, the Germans
we
themselves copied us. The Germans copied their
and they said
genocidal
that.
protocols after what we did here. And you got to remember too, it was Bill
Hmm.
Gates' father that ran family planning after it was established. So
Hmm.
everything that you're looking at right now, they were all what do you call eugenicists. And this
Oh,
guy
Genesis,
that's running the WEF today, Klaus Schwab, his father
yeah.
ran the eugenics society there in Germany, where Adolf Hitler made his father the gave his father the ownership for setting up the particular criteria for the genocidal protocols they were going to practice. So Klaus Schwab's father was a Nazi, and he's now the one that's behind the WEF that's getting ready to drop what you're seeing today. This incredible amount of uh, uh, what you call it marginalization of your finances is going to be on that blockchain, and that's why I say people need. This is what you called a compelled benefit. You have no choice in this, so it's time for you to understand how to survive this particular shift by getting into XRP, buying gold, silver, and
Right,
getting substantial materials. Just do what the banks are doing right now.
right. And we have roughly less than a month now, because it's on schedule to begin in July. Um, again, you've been sounding the clarion call. Shout out to Novatech. I got into Novatech as well. You know what I'm saying? What day are you doing this webinar? What day are you doing your seminar? How can they
Yeah,
tap in? How can they get this information? Because time is
I
getting
appreciate
thin.
that. I appreciate that.